between the lines, learn how to change your life without fear and without failure when you meet Dr. Robert Maurer. I'm Barry Kibrick. How to position yourself for change is what Dr. Robert Maurer, clinical professor at UCLA School of Medicine, specializes in. And in his book, The Kaizen Way, he shows us how using small steps can make change easier and, in turn, more effective.
I'm a writer today because I was a reader when I was 11 years old. And it was...
You do not need to prove your state of happiness to anybody.
Most of these speeches were as much as a month in preparation.
Characters, the heroes in this book are seekers of truth in a story that involves a lot of corruption.
You don't get a chance to really talk about what's real, and it's the perfect thing.
My guest, Dr. Robert Maurer, has helped countless people and organizations reach their objectives and maintain excellence by utilizing techniques that circumvent the brain's built-in resistance to new behavior. With his book, The Kaizen Way, One Small Step Can Change Your Life, he shares his expertise on the art of success so that you can address personal changes while sidestepping many of the roadblocks. Robert, welcome to the show. I have to tell you, when this book came into the office, I said, this is going to be one of the rare times that I've actually followed this advice before I read the book. What happens is, about 10 years ago, I was finding trouble getting motivated to work out. And I created what I thought was a very unique way of going about it with these extremely small steps. And I've been doing it now for 10 years. So when I found that there's a philosophy based on my philosophy, I said, that's wonderful. That's the kind of book I'd like to have on the show. But it was interesting. You call it the Kaizen Way. And yet, again, it implies Japanese, and the Japanese have embraced it. But the truth of the matter is, this is really a very American technique that was brought to the Japanese via MacArthur.
Exactly. Yeah, between the Air Force bases in Japan, where Japanese engineers were hired and trained in Kaizen, and then a man named Edward Deming, who was unknown to Americans until the 80s, but was invited by the Japanese to come over after World War II, and the Japanese Union of Scientists and Engineers asked Dr. Deming to teach them, and firms like Toyota and Honda used his ideas, among them Kaizen, to build what we now consider some of the highest quality products in the world.
You say that innovation is actually a negative word when it comes to change. And not negative, people can be innovatively changed with a sort of epiphany that happens. But for the most of us, we resist change. And that's why the Kaizen Way is so important, because it seems to circumvent the natural resistances that we have.
Right. Because when we think about innovation, we think about taking big steps to get big results. When in fact, when you look at the research, and that's what I think you're referring to, often the biggest results come from starting with the smallest of steps. You experienced it in your life, I've experienced it in mine, and the research even on corporate change suggests that whether it's changing the organization or creating extraordinary products or services, they often come from some small, trivial idea that the person had no idea would, at the end of the day, turn out to be large and innovative.
And which is why, though, we're sort of, culturally, you say, we're sort of attuned to this epiphany and then change,
yes,
which is sometimes the biggest resistance to the small step change way, or the Kaizen way, which is one. And when we say small steps, I really want to make this clear. We're talking about sometimes the most minuscule of steps. And I want to use your example, in fact, with one of your own patients who was having trouble exercising. And the only requirement you asked of her was for 30 seconds, stand on the treadmill. Don't even turn it on, just stand on it for 30 seconds. That was her first step.
Yes. Yeah, because we could have spent months, maybe years, dealing with all the childhood traumas that led her to consider exercise and physical fitness as something that was dangerous and difficult given the pressures of her parents. But she wasn't interested in that, and it's not often the most effective way to change. So if she would just stand on the treadmill with her Wall Street Journal and her cup of coffee and just read the paper while she's got her shoes on, we found that over time, whatever the fear was began to dissipate, And then she found herself moving for 1 or 2 minutes at a time. And a year later, she calls me and tells me she's jogging a mile or two every single day.
Well, you know, as I said, I experienced this myself when I started working out, and I added a small element to it, and I wanted to throw it off you, actually, and that was when I started my workout plan, I made certain that I stopped before I literally finished, because I decided that one way to get me to go back to the gym the next day was if I desired to work out more. So I always purposely held back so that I would say, boy, you know, now I feel like doing that exercise, I'm going to go tomorrow and do it.
Exactly.
And that was another way of taking a small step, I thought, and it really helped that anticipation of looking forward rather than, boy, I'm so tired, I don't think I can go to the gym today.
Yes. Because when people think about exercise, they think about the half hour it's going to take to get to the gym, the 15 minutes to change clothes, the 45-minute American Heart Association recommended workout, and then all that on the way home. Most of us don't have 2 hours a day, or if we do, it's going to only be for a short amount of time. But we all have 1 or 2 or 3 minutes, and as you say, if you stop short of where you start to resist it, the body develops a habit and makes the big leaps by itself.
There's a thing you go into about the different elements of the brain, the reptilian brain, the mammalian brain, and I guess the cortex, which is what makes us human. You say that, and I want to get it exactly right, that the blocks are often the cause of the midbrain gumming up the works, so that something almost instinctually is stopping us from making this change in a small way.
Yes. That the minute you think about change, if the change feels big, it triggers a place in the brain where fear lives called the amygdala, which is in the midbrain. And the minute the fear shows up, it usually paralyzes us, and so we either start looking for excuses not to do it or avoid it because we don't want to be afraid. If you make the steps incrementally small, trivial, then the body's learning how to do what you want it to do. It's almost like you're writing your own software without triggering the amygdala. So it sleeps through the change process while you're making big leaps.
With small steps.
With small steps, right.
I love these kind of contradictory types of things, but that is what life is about, isn't it? It's being able to balance those fine little differences between the contradictions that are just our natural.
Exactly.
In fact, it's funny, you met Raymond Ye in the green room, who's going to be coming on in another episode, and he deals with the yin and yang, which is, again, that similar opposite thing. You have something, though, that, as I said, I liked a book where I was basically supporting and confirming my philosophy. But you had something that I did not have any awareness of, and I want to go into that element. It was the way you defined stress and fear. And you think that when we say something is stressful, it's almost like a cop-out. What we should be saying is we're afraid, and we're afraid to say we're afraid. Can you explain that further?
Sure. Well, if you look at the history of diseases, almost every psychiatric disorder that we treat today was described before the birth of Christ, which isn't surprising. Human misery hasn't changed that much. Stress came along in 1938. We now have close to 70 years of research on it, and nobody thinks stress is getting any better. In fact, people argue stress disorders are becoming more and more epidemic. And we think there's two reasons. One is there's nothing in stress. The physical signs of stress are exactly the same as the body's response to fear. This is not a disease, but the body's gift to us to let us know something's important is happening. And the second reason we think we have a problem with stress and have this disease is that the human body has a natural, healthy response to fear. And I've asked audiences all over the world, when a deer gets afraid, it runs away. When a bird gets afraid,